G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the Book of Daniel. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. Okay, so we're into a brand new book. We're into the Book of Daniel, and we're going to be looking at the introduction to this book in this first session. Now, Book of Daniel has been a major critical battleground because those who are critics of Scripture they don't like this book for a number of reasons, and they do their best to try and tear it apart, because what they don't like about it is the fact that Daniel gives a tremendous amount of detailed prophecy, especially in the second half of the book, and much of that prophecy has already been fulfilled. So exactly that the critics of Scripture feel the Book of Daniel, because of that, they think it's a fraud. They think it could not be a true book. It's got to be a fraud because all this prophecies come to pass. And they said that they question whether he actually wrote the book after what they're saying is, well, he wrote the book after these events took place, rather than at the time the book itself states that it was written. Now, actually, one writer once wrote a book entitled Daniel in the Critics' Den, rather than Daniel in the Lion's Den. What was he doing? He's trying to show how the critics' arguments against the authenticity of this book are completely wrong. The Book of Daniel came at a time in Jewish history when the natures of his prophecies were needed. Now, and for that reason, more prophetic detail was given to Daniel rather than to some of the other prophets. We're going to be dealing, first of all, with some of the introductory material to the book, and with some of its background and the overall flow before we actually get into the details verse by verse. So, now, the author of the book is the same person after whom the book is named. It's clearly Daniel himself, although quite often he writes in the third person singular in the first 6 chapters. Writing in the third person singular means that anyone could have been the author. However, from chapter 7 onwards, he begins writing in the first person singular. We're going to see several examples of this. First person singular, we see, for example, in chapter 7, verse 2, verse 15, verse 28, chapter 8, verse 1, 15, 27, chapter 9, verse 2 and 22, chapter 10, 2 and 7, 11, 12, and then in chapter 12, verse 5. See the same thing. He calls himself Daniel, also uses the first person singular. So clearly, what we see here is that the author of the book is given in the title of the book, Daniel. Now, Daniel is not only the title, but he wrote this book himself over a very lengthy period of time. Actually, the book of Daniel is pretty short when we compare to some of the other prophets' writings. It's a short book. Daniel is mentioned by one other prophet who was his contemporary, Ezekiel. Ezekiel 14, verse 14, we read, "Though these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they should deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, said the Lord Jehovah." This is Ezekiel speaking here. And then if we go down to chapter 14, verse 20, "Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, saith the Lord Jehovah, they should deliver neither son nor daughter, they should deliver their own souls by their righteousness." So what we see there is Ezekiel is referring to Daniel. And according to Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 1, Ezekiel gives us a date when he wrote this segment of the book. It came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, in the 5th day of the month. This is Ezekiel. "As I sat in my house, the elders of Judah sat before me, and the hand of the Lord Jehovah fell upon me there." So by the time Ezekiel writes chapters 8 to 14, Daniel had already been in captivity in Babylon for a total of 14 years. And it was 11 years since he had been elevated by Nebuchadnezzar to his high office earlier. So both Ezekiel and Daniel were actually in the country of Babylonia. They're not in the same city. So within the first 14 years of Daniel's own captivity, at the age of about 30 years of age, he was already well known throughout the ancient world for his righteousness. Ezekiel mentions him again in Ezekiel 28:3. "Behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that is hidden from you." So Ezekiel says this here now. So not only was Daniel's righteousness well known, So was his wisdom. Ezekiel 28 verse 1 was written a little bit later, according to chapter 26 verse 1. It says, and it came to pass in the 11th year, first day of the month, word of Jehovah came unto me. So the date here corresponds to the year 587 BC. And by that time, Daniel had already been 18 years in Babylonian captivity and had held his high position in the government for 15 of those 18 years. So Daniel was already a well-known Jewish individual in the captivity, even by Jews who were living outside the city of Babylon. So this chapter, Ezekiel 28, was written 4 years after Ezekiel 14. But here, as we can see, Daniel's reputation was rather well attested in the areas of wisdom, his knowledge, his righteousness, and his holiness of character. Now, in the New Testament, we're clearly told who the author of the book of Daniel is, because we find in Matthew 24, verse 15, Jesus quotes a passage which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet. He says, when therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet. Now, for those people who are criticizing the book of Daniel as being a fraud or not written by him, what those people don't realize is that when they begin to attack Daniel, of necessity, they are also attacking Jesus Christ, because Jesus attested to the authenticity of the book of Daniel. If you read some of these critical works, you'll find that they really attack Daniel very strongly, calling him a pious fraud. Yet at the same time, that same person tend to elevate Jesus, but Jesus attested to the authenticity of the book. The two can only hold together because Jesus obviously considered Daniel to have been a valid prophet. And so he gives him the title, Daniel the prophet. Jesus quotes him again in Mark 13, verse 14. So either Jesus was right or he was wrong. If he was wrong, well, then they could not keep elevating him to a high position. So on this score alone, Daniel and Jesus must hold together. And certainly, Jesus believed in the validity of Daniel, called him a prophet, and quoted a segment of his writing. Now, the name Daniel could mean one of two things. In Hebrew, there's a yod, Y-A-D, in the middle of his name, so it could be taken in two ways. And two ways are this. It could mean God is my judge, or it could mean God is judge. So the name Daniel means either God is my judge or God is judge. Now, Daniel is not the only one to have this name in the scriptures, because we read of at least three others who had the name Daniel. In 1 Chronicles 3:1, we learn that one of David's own sons was given the name Daniel. In Ezra 8:2, we learn of a priest who was given this name. And then in Nehemiah 10:6, one of the elders of Israel was also called Daniel. So altogether, we know of 4 different people in the Old Testament history who had this same name, if you count Daniel the prophet as one of them. So there are 4 people in total. When was this book written? Well, the date is given within the book itself. It begins around 605 BC. Now, using the Gentile way of dating, which means BC, before Christ, BC, if you see BCE somewhere, it means before the Common Era. So 605 BC to 536 BC was the span of Daniel's prophecies. Now, in chapter 1, verse 1, he says that he began writing in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, which was also the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar's deportation, which was 605. But Jeremiah 25:1 says the 4th year. And the reason Jeremiah says the 4th year is that Jeremiah is using the Jewish date, the Jewish way of reckoning time, based on Jehoiakim was in his 4th year of reign, whereas Daniel is basing his reckoning of time as because he's writing to Babylonians. He's writing to Gentiles in these first 6 chapters or so. He says that it was the 3rd year. So there's no contradiction there. Just a different way that they look at the timing. Now, also in chapter 10, verse 1, we're told that he continued to record and write up to the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So the 12 chapters of the book of Daniel, although not making a very long book, they record a considerable period of history covering a total of 69 years. And this coincided with the entire period of Israel's captivity in Babylon and a little bit after. Now, where does Daniel fit into the Old Testament canon? Well, in your English Bibles, Daniel is listed as being the last of the major prophets, along with Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. In the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation made in about 250 BC, Daniel is listed among the prophets. The Latin Vulgate, translated by Jerome, also puts Daniel within the prophets. Josephus, who is a 1st century Jewish historian, when he began dealing with the books of the Old Testament, he also listed Daniel among the prophets. However, in the Hebrew Bible, Daniel is not placed with the prophets at all, but he's placed within a 3rd segment of the Hebrew Bible. Now, Hebrew Bible is divided into 3 main units, which are, first of all, the law, which are the first 5 books. Second, we have the prophets. And then third, we have the writings, which are all the books of wisdom, the historical books, that sort of stuff. Daniel is found among the writings. He's not found among the prophets in the Jewish Bible. And this is what some critics use in order to challenge the authenticity of the book. However, the reason Daniel's book is placed among the writings by the Jews rather than among the prophets lies in the fact that Daniel was not officially a prophet. It was not because he did not give any prophecies, but because he was a member of Nebuchadnezzar's royal court. By profession, Daniel was a statesman, not a prophet. However, prophetic revelation was certainly given to him, and lots of it. So when the rabbis put the Old Testament canon together, they placed him in a different group or different category from Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel. They chose to put Daniel in the 3rd section. That's the writings. Now, he's not placed there because of the date of his book or the authorship, but only because of his profession as a statesman rather than a prophet. Yet the rabbis did recognize his prophecies as being valid. Historical background to the book. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, made 3 campaigns against Judah and Jerusalem before the city and the temple were destroyed. First campaign was 605 BC. That's when Daniel was taken captive in that first campaign and he was deported. He's going to deal with that in the first 7 verses of his book. Second campaign against Judah by Nebuchadnezzar was in the year 597 BC. And at that time, he took 10,000 skilled Jewish workers captive and he deported them to Babylon so he could use them. Also, in this second deportation, 597, Ezekiel was also taken to Babylon. So Daniel was taken in the first deportation in 605 BC. Ezekiel was taken in the second deportation, and the details of these are given in 2 Kings 24, 11 to 16, and Ezekiel 1, verses 1 to 3. Then the third campaign was in the year 587 or 586 BC, a bit of a change over there somewhere. That was the year that the temple in Jerusalem were destroyed by the Babylonians. 586 is probably more likely at the time. So by that time, Daniel had already been in Babylon for 19 years. And it's important to note his position on behalf of the Jews by then. During that period of time, 19 years that he was there, he had been an official for 16 of those years. So he was down in Babylon for 16 years, getting ready for the Jews to come. Now, concerning the Babylonian kings, some historical background. There is one king that should come onto the Babylonian kings just before Nebuchadnezzar, and that was a king called Nabopolassar. He ruled from 626 on to 605 BC. So 626, 605. When Nebuchadnezzar made his first campaign against Jerusalem, his father Nabopolassar was still king. But by the time Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon, his father was dead, and Nebuchadnezzar then became king. And then Nebuchadnezzar ruled from 605 to 562 BC. We're going to have a lot to say about him because he's a major figure in the book of Daniel. Next king was Marduk from 562 to 560. He's also known by the name Evil Merodach or Evil Merodach. That's the way he's listed in 2 Kings 25:27 and Jeremiah 52:31. Now, he was murdered by king number 3, which was Neriglissar, also known as Nerigel-Sharezer, which is a Hebrew form. It is spelled somewhere like that. You can find him in Jeremiah 39:3. Jeremiah 39:3. Hang on, I might have Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, here is Neriglissar here. Now, king number 4 was Labashi Marduk. He ruled for all of 2 months during May and June of 556 BC. He was assassinated by king number 5, Nabonidus. So he didn't last long. It seems that being king of Babylon was a bit of an occupational hazard. Nabonidus reigned from 556 to 539. He co-ruled with his son, king number 6, who is Belshazzar. We're also going to see him in the book. Nabonidus was sole regent for 3 years. Then he made his son co-regent because Nabonidus didn't like to stay in Babylon. He'd travel around, and so he left his son there to take care of matters of state. Now, concerning the Medo-Persian kings, the one who destroyed Babylon was Cyrus the Great. Now, he ruled from 539 to 530 BC. Now, he was originally king over Persia only, and as such, he began to reign 20 years earlier in 559 BC. He had a war with the Medes. He defeated the king of the Medes between 550 and 549 BC. He then captured their capital city of Ecbatana, and then he united the Medes with the Persians under his rule. Technically, they were united as co-equals, but they actually weren't. And so they became known as the Medes and the Persians, or the Medo-Persian Empire. In the year 547, Cyrus took the country of Lydia, and this famous king Croesus, the one who reckons everything he touched turned into gold. The next Medo-Persian king was Cambyses. From 530 to 522, he committed suicide. Third was Pseudo-Smerdis. Pseudo-Smerdis in 522 BC is also known as Gautama and as Bardia, mostly known as Pseudo-Smerdis. Now, Smerdis was actually the real king, but Pseudo-Smerdis looked just like him. So he had Smerdis killed and took the throne and pretended to be him. That's why they call him Pseudo-Smerdis. Fourth king was Darius I Hystaspes. He knew the real Smerdis, and when he found out what had happened, he came back and killed Pseudo-Smerdis. So then Darius I Hystaspes then ruled from 522 to 486 BC. He plays a major role in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it was under his rule that the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah were given. Fifth king we see was Xerxes I, also known in the scriptures as Ahasuerus or Assuerus. He ruled from 486 to 465 or 464 BC. Now, he was the husband of Esther. You know, Esther in the book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1 tells us this. Now, while Daniel was not living at that point, Daniel's prophecies actually refer to him. In fact, with Xerxes, there is a turning point in Daniel's prophecies, as we're going to see when we start going through the book. Now, although he ruled for a good length of time, he was murdered. He was followed by the sixth king, Artaxerxes I Longimanus, from 465 or 464 to around about 424, 423 BC. And now this was the period of Nehemiah and Malachi under Artaxerxes I Longimanus. Seventh was Darius II Ocus from 424, 423 to 404. Nothing significant about him. Eighth was Artaxerxes II Mnemon, known as Nemon, 404 to 359. Under his rule, there was continuous rebellion. The ninth with Artaxerxes III Ocus. I know you're going to remember all of these, but it's just a bit of background history. From 359 to about 337. He was murdered by the court eunuch and Chiliarch named Bagaeus. Then came the 10th king Arses from 337 to 336 or 335. He was also murdered by Bagaeus. It was Bagaeus who made Arses king, but then he had a spat, so he killed him. He then made Darius II Codomanus the king in 336 or 335. Of course, after the rise of Darius III Codomanus, when he realized that Bagaeus happened to be the one who had killed the two previous kings, he got a bit nervous. So to make sure that he didn't suffer the same fate, he got in first and he had Bagaeus murdered. And this king here, Darius III, he was the one who was defeated later by Alexander the Great. Now we come to the Hellenistic kings. The first one we see is Alexander the Great. Now he ruled from 331 to 323. He was the son of King Philip II of Macedon. He was personally educated by Aristotle, the famous Greek philosopher. He became king of Macedonia in 331 BC, and he made Macedonia supreme over Greece. And what he did was he united the Greeks and the Macedonians under one kingdom. And he then began a series of battles against the Persians, which we're going to look at later on. In the year 334 BC was his first major defeat of the Persians at a place called Granicus, which then freed the Egyptian or the Greeks, so freed the Greek cities of Asia Minor. Asia Minor is now Turkey. In the year 331, he defeated Darius III Codomanus at Issus, and then he took over Persia. He had one more battle at Arbela, destroyed the capital of Persepolis. But he died in a drunken stupor in 323 BC. And so his empire got split into four parts, two of which are going to play a role in the book of Daniel, Egypt and Syria. And we'll see all this when we get into the book. Now, concerning the Egyptian kings, in the book of Daniel, they're mostly the kings of the south, and these are the Ptolemies. When Alexander died and his four generals split, and they took various areas of Alexander's kingdom. Now, when Daniel talks about the king of the south, it is always the Egyptian king. They're not always the same king, however. And we have a list of 6 of them here to reference to. Now, first of all, Ptolemy the first Soter, he's mentioned in Daniel 11:5, 323 to 285. Then we have Ptolemy the second Philadelphus, mentioned in Daniel 11:6. Ptolemy the third Euergetes, mentioned in Daniel 11:7 to 9. Ptolemy the fourth Philopater from 221 to 204, mentioned in Daniel 11 to 12. I know you're loving all this historical stuff here. Then Ptolemy the fourth Epiphanes, 204 to 180 or 180. He's mentioned in Daniel 11:14 to 17. Now, these are not mentioned by name in his book, but just referred to prophetically as certain kings of the south. And then we had Ptolemy the sixth from 181 to 145. Daniel 11:25 to 27 mentions him. And we had the kings of Syria. These are the Seleucids. Now, in the book of Daniel, they're always known as the kings of the north. The king of the north in Daniel is not what used to be the Soviet Union or Russia, as some people want to make out it is. It's always Syria. It's consistently Syria. There we have Seleucus I, Nicator, 1105. We see that. Antiochus I, Soter, he's 280 to 260. No mention of him in the book of Daniel. Antiochus II, Theos, he's in Daniel 11:6. Then Seleucus II, Callinicus, he is mentioned in Daniel 11:7 to 9. And then we have Seleucus III, Cyrannus, 226 down to about 223. See him in 11:10. And then we have Antiochus III, known as Antiochus the Great, 223 down to 186. Daniel 11:10 to 19 mentioned him. And then we have Seleucus IV, Philopator, mentioned in 11:20. Now, the eighth one in this book of Daniel, the main one among the Syrian kings is a king called Antiochus IV Epiphanes. This is the king around which Hanukkah comes into play, Hanukkah. And he's from 175 to 164 BC. Daniel spends a lot of time with him in Daniel 11:21 to 35. He is the one guilty of the abomination of desolation. This is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And then we have these last three. They're not even dealt with in Daniel. Antiochus IV, Demetrius I, Alexander Belus. So none of these three are actually mentioned in the book of Daniel. Now, what's the style and character of the book? Well, it's often referred to as apocalyptic. This is from the Greek word apocalypse, which means an unveiling of truth. And this is truth which would otherwise have remained concealed and unknown. So Daniel's book is an apocalyptic book. Book of Revelation in Greek is also called simply the apocalypse or the unveiling. And the distinctive nature of an apocalyptic book is that it contains a series of supernatural visions, which themselves will contain many symbols. Now, we shall see when we get to chapter 2 and chapters 7 through 12 that there are going to be a series of visions given to Daniel, which are going to contain symbols. Now, the danger with symbols is that often what people will do is they'll take them and they'll resort to all kinds of guesswork about what they mean, and it's mostly based upon current events. Okay, so consequently, we have all these wild theories. Now, the unique thing about a book like this one is being an apocalyptic book. When Daniel uses symbols, they're going to be explained. Now, either elsewhere in his own book or in another scripture passage. So Daniel does use symbols, but they're used consistently. They'll all be explained, so we don't have to guess what they mean. We're going to find out what they all mean. Remember, the Bible is always its best interpreter, and we're going to see how these symbols will be explained. Now, within these visions are a lot of prophetic utterances or discourses, and these are normally given during oppressive times. What will happen is a prophet sees a vision, and then he records it exactly as he sees it, but he doesn't understand it. So a second characteristic is the presence of a divine interpreter, usually an angel, and then the angel now explains to the prophet what the vision that he's seen means. The vision is given, but within it there is an angel present who serves as a divine interpreter of the vision. Now, the vision could deal with contemporary history, but for the most part, it deals with eschatology or prophetic truth relating to the future. I mean, the book of Revelation, for instance, John just sees stuff, more and more stuff. Same thing with Daniel. We're going to see in Daniel. Again, apocalyptic books were usually written at times of great national stress in Israel and during periods of oppression. So this book was written at a time when Israel was being oppressed by the Babylonian Empire, because as we're going to see as we go through the book, The times of the Gentiles begins with this first empire, the Babylonian Empire. We'll explain what that means shortly. Now, so there are 5 things about an apocalyptic book. First of all, it contains supernatural and symbolic visions. Second, it's usually given during periods of oppression, and in this case, at the fall of Jerusalem. Third, there's the presence of a divine interpreter, usually an angel, to explain the vision. Fourth, the vision itself is recorded as it was seen by the author. And fifth, the theological content is prophetic or eschatological. Now, the main thing about an apocalyptic book is that although it may contain some history, it's intended to be primarily eschatological or prophetic. It will contain prophecies of things to come. Daniel's book fits into that style. And in the Old Testament, you also have the books of Ezekiel and Zechariah. In each of them, each of these 3 books, there are the common elements of visions and angelic interpreters. The visions are recorded exactly as the prophet sees in all 3 books. But none of them understand what he sees until the divine interpreter explains it. Same thing is true of the one apocalyptic book found in the New Testament, which is, of course, the book of Revelation. Again, in this book, we find a high proportion of symbols being used. There are visions, there are angels doing the interpreting of the visions and symbols, and so on and so on. In fact, the bridge between Revelation, the book of Revelation in the New Testament, and the Old Testament is the book of Daniel. Without Daniel, the book of Revelation is impossible to understand. You just couldn't make it out. Conversely, without the book of Revelation, Daniel would be impossible to understand. So these 2 books are interdependent for a proper understanding and interpretation of what they're saying. What the book of Daniel is to the Old Testament, the book of Revelation is to the New Testament. Second characteristic of this book, by way of introduction, is that it was not entirely written in one language. Virtually all the books of the Old Testament were written in Hebrew, with only 2 exceptions. The greatest exception is the book of Daniel, which was written in 2 different languages. First of all, from Daniel 1:1 to Daniel 2:3, and then in Daniel 8:1 to Daniel 12:13, it's written in Hebrew, the Jewish tongue. But then beginning in chapter 2, verse 4 to chapter 7, verse 28, Daniel wrote in a Gentile language called Aramaic. Aramaic was the mother tongue of the Babylonians. It is in the same Semitic family of language as Hebrew. It's therefore a similar, it's like a different dialect of Hebrew. It's constituting a language on its own. So in this second section of the book, Daniel no longer writes in Hebrew, but he's going to write in Aramaic. And then beginning in chapter 8, verse 1 through to chapter 12:13, he reverts back to Hebrew. And there are various reasons for this. Some of them we're going to see as we go through the book. Now, Daniel's section of Aramaic is the longest section. However, as was mentioned, writing in Aramaic was not unusual, but it was exceptional. While all the other books of the Old Testament were written exclusively in Hebrew, there's Ezra, chapter 4, verse 8 to Ezra 6:18 was written in Aramaic, as was Ezra 7:12 to 26. There's just one single verse in Jeremiah 10:11 is written in Aramaic. Otherwise, everything else is in Hebrew. Perhaps the main reason for this is because the Hebrew sections of Daniel's book deal primarily with the Jewish people, while the Aramaic sections deal with the Gentile nations. So when he's dealing with the Jews, he writes in Hebrew. When he's speaking to the Gentiles, he writes in Aramaic, which is a Gentile language. So Daniel has 2 primary languages he uses, Hebrew and Aramaic. Third characteristic concerns chronology. Now, Daniel doesn't write in chronological sequence, okay? He decided to do that because he was not really developing history. Daniel is developing a theme. And that theme, as we're going to see, is going to deal with the Gentile nations. although he did not put his book together in chronological sequence, he does date his prophecies. So we don't know, so we do know in what order the events actually occurred, but they're not written in that order. And so the real chronological order of the book of Daniel would be like what we see here on that little table I gave you. Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, all sequential, follow each other. But then Daniel moves from the chronological sequence there. The way the events actually happen chronologically means that after chapter 4 comes chapter 7, and then 8, and then comes chapter 5, followed by chapter 9. Then comes chapter 6, followed by chapters 10 through 12. So the fact that he's not putting his material in strict chronological sequence is telling us that Daniel, he's not attempting to deal primarily with history, but he's developing this very important theme. And this theme is the new program of God, which is now being put into effect with the emergence of the Babylonian Empire in Daniel 1. And if you remember, cast your mind back to the book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, it was not written in chronological sequence either. It's had to do with themes as well. Fourth characteristic concerns the miracles in the book. Here we have one of the four main periods of miracles during biblical history. Now, we often hear, that throughout the Bible period there are miracles everywhere, signs and wonders all of the time. But in actual fact, when you examine it, that's not true at all. Even in biblical times, miracles were few and far between, and they occurred in only four main periods. In the book of, outside of the creation miracles, we're talking about in the prophets and stuff, and in the writings. In the book of Daniel, we have one of those four periods. The other three periods include, first of all, the time of the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings, the parting of the Red Sea, manna, all those sorts of things. This first period extended through about 40 years. A second period of miracles was in the time of Elijah and Elisha. Now, these were two prophets of Israel. They didn't write anything. They were not writing prophets. They were vocal prophets. Their time was also a period of a lot of miracles. And the third period in the Old Testament is right here in the book of Daniel. The fourth period occurred in the New Testament, and that is the time of the Gospels and the book of Acts. So these are the only four periods of time in biblical history where miracles occurred. At other times, they were extremely rare. Now, how does Daniel contribute to systematic theology? Well, he develops certain theological truths which teach us a number of things. There are 8 such things we're going to look at just quickly. First area is called bibliology, meaning the doctrine of the scriptures. He makes 2 contributions here. In chapter 9, we learn that the book of Jeremiah was already considered to be an inspired book, because as Daniel begins to develop his life after Daniel 9, he bases his lifestyle upon the authority of the book of Jeremiah. And Daniel quotes Jeremiah's writings as the very word of God. So no sooner had Jeremiah's work been completed than it was already recognized as the inspired word of God. Now, this should distance us from a mistake which is often made, and that is that some group of men or church council, they got together one day and they decided which books of the Old Testament were inspired and which were not. That's not true. The truth is that inspired books were recognized as such as they were written. No council of men, no church synod, no Jewish council ever sat down to determine which books were inspired and which were not inspired. No group of men would ever have the authority to determine such an important matter as authentic inspiration. A book is inspired if it is a product from God, because he used the Holy Spirit to cause men to write scripture. If these books were truly inspired, they were recognized as being the inspired word of God upon their completion. Now, although Jeremiah had only recently completed his book within perhaps 3 or 4 decades of when Daniel refers to it, yet it was already recognized as inspired. This is because the nature of inspiration is to be found within the book itself and not in the decision of men's counsels. So now we know a book is inspired because God produced it. He used human authors, but he's the ultimate source of all scripture. Because he's the source, it's immediately inspired. All men can do is then recognize the inspiration, which is already inherent in that book. Men can't decide what's inspired and what's not. Neither can church councils or church councils. Now, Daniel validates the prophecies of Jeremiah, and he'll mention that Jeremiah is an inspired book. Later on in his book, Daniel mentions also a book of truth in heaven. It's a book of truth in heaven. And the picture he portrays is that in heaven, there is a book. And that spells out God's entire plan and program. But this book in heaven, called the Book of Truth, is revealed piecemeal to people on earth through the prophets. So what we have in Scripture are segments of the Book of Truth already in heaven. There's a Book of Truth in heaven, and the Bible is just a partial revelation of that book, according to what we see in Daniel. Second area of doctrine is theology proper, which is the doctrine of God the Father. Daniel points out a number of things about this. First of all, we're going to learn from Daniel that God is sovereign. He controls the nations. He decides who's going to sit upon a throne, who's not. Although he uses various means to determine who's going to rule over a nation, it's always God is the one who so determines. In our system, for example, no prime minister was ever elected apart from God's decision. God uses the Australian electoral system to establish who the PM is going to be. But it is essentially God's choice, and not so much the choice of the Aussie voters. Although we might have a preference among the prime ministerial contenders, nevertheless, however we vote, whether or not the personality preferred man wins or loses, it'll only be by divine appointment. It's by divine appointment that currently we have Prime Minister Albanese sitting in Canberra. God is sovereign. We're going to see in this book how he sets up kings and he deposes them. Sometimes he'll even call the basest of men to sit upon thrones. Second thing we see here is that God rules the kingdoms of men. We see that in chapter 4, 25 and chapter 7, 14. Third, we also learn that God is loving. Chapter 10, 11, and 19. Although he is sovereign, yet his sovereignty is controlled by his love. And then we see God is righteous in chapter 9, 7 to 8. And because of that, sin will be punished. In this book, it is especially the sin of pride, which is going to be dealt with. Fifth, we're going to learn that God is also merciful, even to the point that he'll restore a pagan king back to power. We see that in chapter 4:34. We also see that he'll not always intervene to save his saints. At times he will, when it'll bring glory to him. In a couple of situations in this book, we see that God does intervene to save his saints. The sixth thing we learn is that God is omniscient. Again, chapter 4, 24 to 33. He knows everything. Therefore, he's able to reveal what goes on in the minds of kings to Daniel, the prophet, so that he can interpret these things. And then seventh, we're going to learn that God is omnipotent. Chapter 4:35. He's all-powerful, and no one can stay the hand of God. Third area of theology, which we're going to see, is Christology, meaning the doctrine of the Son. First of all, it is exclusively in this Old Testament book where, of all the prophecies concerning the first coming of the Messiah, the timing of it will be exactly dated in the book of Daniel. In chapter 9, 24 to 27, we're going to see that the very date when Messiah was supposed to appear at his first coming is given in the text. While other prophets had lots of things to say about the first coming of the Messiah, this prophet Daniel was given revelation as to the exact date when this would happen. Second contribution he makes is in chapters 7 and 12, where we're going to find things being told to us concerning the second coming of Jesus Christ as well. So Daniel informs us about certain things which relate to both the first and second coming. Pneumatology, the doctrine of the Spirit, Daniel makes no contribution. Then we have angelology, where he does make a contribution. It's the doctrine of angels. He'll make 4 contributions there. First of all, we'll see angels functioning in the role of revealers. They'll be giving revelation to Daniel in Daniel 8, Daniel 9, Daniel 10. There'll also be angels giving interpretation of what Daniel sees. That's the first thing about angels. Second, They're going to be angels of deliverance. An angel who will save the Jews from the fiery furnace. Be an angel who saves Daniel from the mouth of the lions. Now, the Old Testament has many things to say about good angels. No Old Testament book outside of the book of Daniel ever names any of them. But in Daniel's book, we got the name of two angels. Michael was the archangel, and the other angel is Gabriel, and he plays a major role in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke because he reveals the truth concerning the first coming of Christ to the human parents of Jesus. Daniel 7:10 gives a hint concerning the number of angels. It says thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. So there's a lot of angels. Also, the book of Daniel also shows that the physical appearance of angels tends to cause fear in people. We see that in Daniel 10:49. Some prayers are answered by means of angels. In Daniel, we see it twice. Angel was used in Daniel 9 and again in Daniel 10 to answer the prophet's prayer for more revelation. Angelic beings also we see function in the capacity of what we call cosmocrats, meaning as rulers of nations. According to Daniel 10:21 and Daniel 12:1, the archangel Michael not only has authority over the other angels, but he's also the chief prince over Israel. Now, a fifth area where Daniel will make a contribution is to the doctrine of Satan. However, Daniel, he doesn't actually deal with Satan specifically, but he deals with demonology. This is the doctrine of demons. In the book of Daniel, we learn that not only does God have good angels to control the affairs of nations, but Satan also has his own fallen angels who are also of high rank and authority. And two such passages we find in Daniel. 10:13, we see that there's a demon who's the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and 10:20 mentions the prince of Greece. So for every human government on earth, including the Australian government, there's a major demon trying to thwart God's purposes and to influence those who are in control of the government to make certain decisions that will especially go contrary to God's program in its relationship to the people of Israel. In Daniel 10:10-14, a leading demon holds an angel of God captive for 3 weeks in order to prevent God's revelation to Daniel of things to come. So one contribution the book of Daniel makes to demonology is that it mentions high-ranking demons who head up nations. Anthropology, doctrine of man, Daniel makes two contributions here. First, the book addresses the depravity of man as evidenced by the conduct of Daniel's enemies, which man building his own kingdom and sinning, which led to the Babylonian captivity. Second, the book mentions the resurrection of the body in 12:2. There's actually very little in the Old Testament to do with the resurrection of the dead. In only two other places in the entire Old Testament is there any reference to the resurrection of the dead. One is Job and the other is in Isaiah. But Daniel gives us the most detail so far concerning the resurrection of the human body, both of the righteous and the unrighteous. The seventh area has to do with Israelology, doctrine of Israel. And this is largely his theme. And Daniel is going to spell out God's program for Israel during a period that is known as the times of the Gentiles. Today we're currently living in the times of the Gentiles. And this is the time of Gentile dominion over Jerusalem and the Jewish people. According to the book of Daniel, this period spans from the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity in 586 BC, right down to the second coming of Messiah. So it's from the dethronement of the last Davidic king, Zedekiah, on to the enthronement of the Messianic Davidic king, Jesus. The eighth area is ecclesiology, but Daniel has nothing to say. That's the doctrine of the church. Daniel has nothing to say about that. Last area of theology where he makes a contribution is eschatology, doctrine of future things. 5 things we need to see here. First of all, he's going to deal with God's future plan for Israel. And second, he deals with God's plan for the Gentile nations. Third, he'll tell us about God's program for the tribulation. It's from Daniel that we learn that the tribulation will be 7 years in length. Fourth thing, he's going to have a lot to say about the Antichrist. Fifth, Daniel is the only one who tells us that there's going to be a 75-day interval between the end of the 7 years of tribulation and the commencement of the millennial kingdom. And during this 75 days, lots of things are going to happen. So Daniel makes a good number of contributions in the whole area of theology. So, which means we're going to learn a lot of stuff as we get through the book. Purpose of the book, 3 possible reasons. The book of Daniel was written to show the Jews how they should live in a Gentile world. Now, remember, Daniel's contemporaries were no longer living in their own land or under their own government. They've been taken into captivity, and for the first time since the Exodus, they're now living within a Gentile majority. So the question is, how are we going to live in this Gentile world? So Daniel writes to explain how a Jew should live in a Gentile world, especially in this time while the law of Moses was still very much in effect. A second suggested purpose for the book of Daniel is to teach the Gentiles the true nature of Israel's God. Now, by pagan standards, the God of Israel would have been looked upon as a defeated God. Why? Because in the ancient world, when nations went to war against each other, it was not reckoned to be merely a war between the nations, but also between their gods. So when Babylon and Assyria went to war with each other, the pagan people also looked upon this as a war between Babylonian gods and Assyrian gods. Babylon defeated Assyria, it meant the gods of Babylon defeated the gods of Assyria. The Assyrian gods would then be looked upon as defeated gods, so much so that even their statues would go into captivity along with the people. Now, to the pagan world, Israel has been conquered, city of Jerusalem destroyed and in ruins, temple no longer stands. So by pagan reckoning, Israel's God is looked upon as having been defeated. Now, what Daniel teaches the Gentile world in this book is the nature of Israel's God. How that their ability to defeat Israel was not due to the fact that the Babylonian gods were stronger than the God of Israel, but rather that this was God's punishment of his own people in allowing Babylon to conquer them. So Babylon and all the other Gentile powers will soon learn the nature of Israel's God. He's not a defeated God, even if his people Israel happen to be defeated at this point in their history. Third purpose for the book of Daniel is to show how Daniel was able to look out for the welfare of the Jews in the Babylonian captivity. God placed Daniel in a very high position in the Babylonian government throughout the entire duration of the Babylonian captivity. And because of this, he'll be able to provide for the welfare of his own people, and God will use him to help the Jews to survive. So this proves that God did not forsake his people. The theme of the book, times of the Gentiles. Again, this is the lengthy period from the Babylonian captivity right down to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And Daniel's going to spell out the whole course of the times of the Gentiles, and he's going to trace it through the 4 Gentile empires that we're going to be looking at. Outline of the book, 3 basic ways of doing this. One way is to base it upon the content of the book. If you outline it this way, the book divides into 2 main divisions, chapters 1 to 6, which contain mostly history, with a little bit of prophecy there. Chapters 7 to 12, which contains prophecy pretty much exclusively, with a little bit of history. That's one way you can look at it. Chapter 1 to 6, history. Chapter 7 to 12, prophecy. Second way is based upon the use of the 2 different languages. This would divide it into 3 sections. Chapter 1 would be the Hebrew introduction, which is labeled the personal history of Daniel the prophet. This one shows how he gained high authority. Second division would be the Aramaic section, which is chapters 2 to 7. This contains a prophetic history of the Gentiles, because he deals primarily the Gentiles in chapters 2 to 7. He uses the Aramaic language. And in this section 2 to 7, there's no mention of Israel. In chapter 7, which mentions saints in reference to the Jewish people. Third division would be the second Hebrew section from 9 to 12, which deals with the prophetic history of Israel, and also dealing with Israel's deliverance. But there's a third way, right? There's a third way. So, we have chapter 1 to 6, chapter 7 to 12, then we have the languages. Now there's a third way, and this is the way we're going to look at it. This divides the book into by specific topics. Basically, each chapter has its own topic, with the exception of the last 3, which are one unit, 10, 11, and 12. So each chapter is basically an individual unit, except for the last 3 chapters. The book is then divided into 10 main subdivisions on the basis of topics. Every chapter from chapter 1 through chapter 9 is a self-contained unit. It is a story in itself. But chapters 10, 11, and 12 constitute one continuous vision. So that will comprise the 10th segment. And I'm surprised I got it done. Thanks for coming along. Study hard, grow strong.